May I speak in the name of our loving, liberating, and life-giving God. Amen. For centuries, one of the most popular parts of pilgrimage to Jerusalem has been walking the Via Dolorosa, or the Way of Suffering. The path weaves and winds through the old city, tracing a route from the Antonia fortress, an ancient citadel where Pilate supposedly condemned Jesus to death, all the way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, purported to be built over the tomb out of which Jesus arose. The way is not long, half a mile or so, but it usually takes most of a day to walk. The path is punctuated by 9 stations, places to pause and pray, remembering and even reenacting different parts of the Passion narrative that we just heard, along with 5 more stations found inside the church itself. If this reminds you of the Stations of the Cross, it should, as these are an adaptation of the Via Dolorosa, intended for those who could not actually travel to Jerusalem and experience the dusty roads for themselves. This desire, even this compulsion, to walk the very way of Jesus in his final hours, or as close to the way as we can now approximate, is an important reminder that in his earthly life, Jesus called us not to worship him, but to follow him. "Follow me," he said over and over again. The most daunting, absurd, life-changing invitation of all. "Follow me," he said, as though it were that simple, as though we could simply say yes, as though we were free to choose well, as though we could rise to this occasion. It makes sense that a lot of people chose not to follow him. It makes sense that a lot of people choose not to follow him today. It is called the Way of Suffering for a reason. The way is hard. It puts us in solidarity with the pain and grief and isolation and heartache of others, and it puts us in touch with our own. Rarely have I come to the reading of the Passion and not found at least one place in my life that resonated with Jesus' experience of loneliness and disillusionment and pain. And on those few occasions when all was well enough in my own life, there's the suffering of the world to consider. Our prayers of the people in the season of Epiphany included a petition in which we said together, "Bless those who live where there is violence and poverty." Every time we said those words, I would think, which is to say, bless us all, bless us everywhere. Today we observe Palm and Passion Sunday, a Sunday that, frankly, doesn't make a lot of sense. Ideally, we would spend today reenacting Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, his ragtag group of misfit friends putting on a street theater scene with whatever they could grab, like the branches of palm that lined the road. Ideally, we would spend today observing not Palm and Passion Sunday, but Palm Sunday, period. But we have to rush ahead in our ritual remembrance, sprinting from station 1 through 14 in the course of an hour and 15 minutes, because most Christians for the last several hundred years have either been unable, due to other commitments, or unwilling, for any number of reasons, to come back on Friday and really sit with the story of the Passion, to slowly move through the experience of Jesus' suffering. There's a reason the church will be packed next Sunday on Easter, but sparsely attended on Good Friday. We don't want to hear about humanity's capacity for violence, or our fear of change, or our tendency towards scapegoating. We don't want to be reminded of betrayal and abandonment and shame. Maybe we feel all too aware of them already. Maybe we don't want to face that these are true not only for Jesus' life, but for our own too. but ignoring our own capacity to hurt and to hurt others does not make them go away. In the words of James Baldwin, it's astonishing the lengths people will go to avoid an honest mirror. Our mirrors do not get much more honest than Good Friday. Knowing all we know about where that path would lead, how it would wind through those claustrophobic streets, traversing the wilderness of death into resurrection, it seems amazing that anyone did follow and that anyone still does. But when those first disciples, men and women, rich and poor, blind and sighted, proud and confused, accepted Jesus' daunting invitation, they had no idea what they were walking into. Like us, suffering came upon them unbidden and unwelcome. As they stood on the cusp of that horrible but holy beginning, just as we stand on the cusp of Holy Week ahead, everything was uncertain. We tell the story of 14 stations and 3 days and half a mile because we're looking backward. But they were living it forward. They were stepping into the unknown. They were walking into a tomorrow when everything kept changing, when they didn't know what was true or real or trustworthy, where the ground beneath them seemed to be shifting, until they were left with only each other and only one option: to keep going, to suffering and death, to darkness and uncertainty. There was, at some point, no way out but the way through. Bob was a successful lawyer in a mid-sized city, a man with a promising future and a lot of potential, whose career was on the rise. He was smart and capable, steady and strong. He was good at what he did, and he knew it. He was independent and accomplished and rather happy with his life. And then one day he was driving home from his big job to his big house when a big truck hit his not-so-big car. In a millisecond, everything changed. His car shattered, as did many of his bones, as did most of his dreams. Miraculously, he survived, though the next few months were little more than a living hell. He went through countless surgeries at multiple hospitals, leaning hard on close family and distant friends, people from whom he had never needed to ask much before. He was unpracticed in the art of receiving, of needing. In the end, he was paralyzed. In the end, his world was turned upside down and inside out. He would have had every right to devolve into anger, to self-destruct, to rage, and to be sure, he experienced a wide and extreme swath of emotions in response to this new life as he healed and grieved and adjusted. But eventually, he decided to say yes to living the life that was now his to live. Yes to even this most unwelcome reality. Never a man of much faith before, Bob discovered a kinship with Christ in his suffering as he traversed his own Via Dolorosa. And while he would never walk again, he decided, nevertheless, to follow Jesus. Years later, he became a renowned spiritual director and teacher with a calm, steady, assuring presence. One of his directees observed that it was almost as if Bob's wheelchair became for him a kind of monastery that allowed him to go inward. Bob would not have chosen to be paralyzed. He didn't want it, he didn't like it. But once it happened, he did get to choose how to respond. And he chose to love, to surrender, to live, and cultivated a profound sense of spirituality and trust that eludes many of us for most of our own lives. One of my friends recently reminded me that while not everything happens for a reason, in everything that happens, God is still present, and meaning can still be found. I don't know what it was for you that first made you willing to follow the way of Jesus, to walk his road of suffering into new life. What doors closed? What better options turned to dust in your hands? Maybe it was a life-changing accident like Bob's, or a life-changing diagnosis, the end of addiction or the end of a marriage, the endless chronic pain or relentless chronic doubt, or a shape-shifting grief that would not let you be. Surely we would not choose our suffering, but once it falls upon us, we too have the choice to live or to die, to hope or despair, to risk trying or simply give up. Most importantly, we are given a glimpse of the stunning, surprising truth at the heart of the Passion narrative, that our suffering is never foreign to God. Congregational minister Frederick Buechner reminds us that in saying Christ was dead and crucified and buried, we are proclaiming that Christ is also in hell, and when we are in hell, we may find him there too. We would not have chosen our suffering, nor the suffering of the world, but it comes. And when it does, we have to make choices like those foolish, faithful first disciples. They would not have chosen the arrest, the mock trial, the torture, the humiliation, the death sentence, the cross, just as we would not choose war and terror and estrangement and grief. They fought back. They tried to avoid and numb and deny. But those moments came anyway. The truth is that we, like they, really don't and really can't know what tomorrow will bring. It may be that days ahead hold more sorrow and fear than we would like to imagine. It may be that we need to linger in an uncertain, in-between place for longer than we would like. We would not choose it, but we are here. And into whatever uncertainty or suffering or loneliness or longing might be plaguing you today, Christ came and comes and will come again. The trouble with hoping to avoid the way of suffering, with pretending that we aren't capable of deceit and cruelty, with trying to ignore our individual and collective shadow, is that it simply doesn't work. Drawing close to the story of Jesus' suffering confronts us with the reality of the suffering all around us. But in drawing close, we might also notice something unexpected. Jesuit priest James Martin tells the story in a recent book of a child and grandfather sitting near the port of New York, watching huge boats come in, one right after the other. As a huge container ship navigated a tight, busy waterway, the little girl became anxious. "Grandpa," she cried, watching the boats, "that one is going to collide with the other. It's going to be a disaster." The grandfather had to look again at the scene before him to determine what was so distressing to this beloved girl. And then it clicked. He pulled her onto his lap and traced the big boat with his pointing finger. "We are far away from these boats," he explained, his voice low and comforting. "So it looks like a disaster is ahead. But actually, that boat is going to slip right behind the smaller one. They aren't going to hit each other. If we were able to get closer, you could see that everything is going to be okay in the end." Maybe it is precisely in getting closer to the hurt and the heartache that we realize the surprising truth of God's ability to save and redeem and heal and make whole. Maybe it is precisely in getting closer that what appears a sort of disaster is revealed to be something else altogether. I would not choose to have been remade in any of the ways that life has thrust upon me. I would not choose the Via Dolorosa for Jesus or for myself or for anyone I've ever loved. but it is the road he was called to walk. And while walking it will cost us, it will also change us, and God will surprise us along the way. Follow me, Jesus whispers, on the cusp of these holy days. And the choice, as always, is ours. Amen.